Hello, everybody. Maybe the sound is slightly too high. No? Okay, that's fine. Then it's at least to me. So today we're going to talk about IT landscape, in particular control versus scaling, what's the difference, where you have to focus. And the context of this talk is rapidly scaling organizations. This means that your organization double its size at least once a year. And by doubling the size, I also mean revenue, processes, systems that you use, and so on and so forth. This could be quite scary. Before we go to the IT landscape, I would like to share some facts about me. I'm a hobby diver. This is my passion. Besides that, after some experience with diving, the first question I ask myself is it possible to have a coral reef at my place? I answered that later. And besides that, I'm an engineer. I wouldn't define myself that clearly what kind of engineer, but for your information, the last 10 years, I'm mostly focusing on e-commerce systems. I was involved in developing and integrating different systems in companies like Zalando, Home24, many Rocket Internet Ventures, also ProSiebenSat.1 Ventures with focus e-commerce. I was taking lead development roles, also solution architect, system engineer, and my latest but not current role anymore as a chief technical officer at Flaconi, I was also responsible for multiple IT departments. And besides that, I had this unique opportunity to observe and be involved in a real rapid scaling, which means that the company tripled all possible factors in less than 2 years. Of course, this brings a lot of challenges with that, and I'm here to share some of them with you. Before we switch to the boring topic, IT landscape, let's talk a little bit about my reef. Not as that important, but I'm using this option to show off. So I started with a really small fish tank in 2010. It had 30 liters. It has 2 fish inside. And the tech which was behind it was a really simple lamp, pump, and a mechanical filter. This fish tank was able to sustain 2 clownfishes. After I noticed that keeping them alive is not a problem at all. Of course, I upgraded. I exchanged the fish tank with the bigger one, doubled the size, also doubled the amount of the fishes, and also introduced some corals, because this is a really complicated thing to have and take care, but on the other side, it's really beautiful. For that, I have to upgrade also the tech I had. I need to add an additional pump, additional filter. I need a biofilter, and I have to do the first automation. So problem is that water evaporates, salt doesn't. So if you want to have a consistent amount of salt, you need a device which constantly pumps fresh water inside. This was going pretty amazing, and I was thinking, wow, everything grows, I need to upgrade again. So I switched this year, this is a picture from today, to 250 liters fish tank. I have more than 10 different types of fishes, around 30 different types of corals. However, the tech stack which was behind it also evolved. I had to add multiple filters. I have to extract particular chemicals, and I have to focus more on automation. This is the result. It's still work in progress. There's still a lot of manual process inside that has to be optimized, and so on and so forth. And everything still grows, so probably in the near future I have to upgrade to a new fish tank and also extend the tech stack, introducing completely new components with a particular role. Why I'm telling you that? Besides of showing off, let's imagine that this was a parallel universe where corals were bitcoins, and I made this pitch where everything scaled in a short period, and so on and so forth. And let's also imagine in this parallel universe that this is a tech pitch, and my wife won't send me away if I buy a bigger fish tank. Probably somebody from the business people would say to you now, wow, this grows like crazy. Probably we can crush sea life by 2025. And probably yes, we should add more and more equipment, minimize the amount of manual processes, and so on and so forth, because complexity is rising. You have to take care about many things. This is more or less how it also works in a traditional IT landscape. it constantly evolves to sustain more complicated ecosystems inside. Your IT landscape is not only your shop. This is something that you should understand. There are multiple other systems that are taken in consideration. They're growing and growing and growing. Before we go further, I would like to clarify some terms so there is no misunderstanding. I use the term cluster of components. Cluster of components means that this is a group of components. They may be the same or may have a slightly different function, but they have the same purpose. It's a common issue that you're gonna require multiple tools to do the same thing. Another way around, then we have components inside of those clusters. I would like to keep it abstract as well. So component could be something that you built on your own, which is fully custom, or it can be something that you took off the shelf and you host on premise, or it can be software as a service, or whatever you can imagine. Nowadays, there is as a service for everything. So after we clarified this terminology, let's take a look at the traditional evolution. This may be slightly different in your particular case. I try to keep it generic as possible, but let's imagine that you just went online. Probably you have like 4 or 5 clusters. You have your shop system. This could be front-end, back-end, microservices, and so on. Doesn't really matter, but it's one cluster. You need at least one payment method, payment gateway. You need some kind of shipping gateway and some kind of content management system, because probably you either manage the content inside of your shop or you have some kind of landing pages or a blog, or doesn't really matter. Your content management will evolve and you can have more and more components with the time. And of course, you want to see how many orders you're doing and some basic analytics as well. So probably you have a tech manager and bunch of tracking pixels. The next thing that probably gonna come is the customer relation management. You want to get more customers, probably emails, retention, and so on. You need more efficient way to do that. Probably you have 1 or 2 systems doing that, engaging your customers in some way with promotions or whatever is needed. You have to optimize marketing campaign. Cluster is appearing. You want to manage your marketing campaigns for different platforms. Also another topic, probably you're going to have multiple of those, like for every platform and so on. At some point, you want to optimize your expenses. So you have definitely 2 or 3 different softwares who does some kind of bid management depending on the platform. Once you have data and analytics, probably the next logical thing is recommendation. It's probably going to be a cluster on your own because you want to use those recommendations through multiple channels. Then you want to control over your data. You have data warehouse. You collect there. You want to aggregate and analyze your data through some kind of reports. Then BI comes in with their tools and so on and so forth. Catalog management. At some point, you're going to notice, depending also on the business case, but in most of the cases, your product workflow gets more and more complicated. So you definitely need a dedicated component or multiple of those, which add the dynamic data to your product data. One spreadsheet is not enough for accounting. ERP system is coming. Once the paper is too much, you should digitalize that one in some kind of document management, because you cannot run every time to accounting when you want to check an invoice for 3 months or a particular contract. Warehouse management, once your logistics gets bigger and bigger, problems are introduced, and of course there's app for that, or maybe 100, so probably this is gonna extend as a known cluster. And this grows and grows and grows. Backup management, source control, provisioning software. When I'm saying provisioning software, I don't mean just the software that you use to deploy your servers inside of this cluster, but probably you're going to have also a component to provision your workstations as well. When you have 100 employees, probably you don't install Windows every time. Communication tools, emails, chat functions, project management, remote access, VPN, remote desktop, and so on and so forth. At some point, monitoring and alerting gets really critical. So instead of the simple system you have a full-blown cluster with multiple solutions monitoring internal, external systems, and so on and so forth. Not only your shop, but maybe also, I don't know, the infrastructure in your logistics as well. And there is no one solution for that. Then the era of the department-specific software starts. Everything gets more sophisticated, so probably accounting, HR, controlling, they're gonna require their own set cluster of different components that they use in every daily business. A side effect that I noticed by creating this presentation is that I'm not really good with PowerPoint or those kind of things, and I try to keep it simple as possible. And unexpected side effect is that actually all those clusters looks like those warnings on the cigarettes. And I guess that at least one person in your company probably thinks that he's gonna have some health issue because of source control or payment gateways or shop and so on. So basically choose your poison. Once again, these are clusters. At the end of the day, you may have over 100 applications working in some way together. Another thing that you can notice is that everything is structured in this nice way, like blocks, and you can imagine, you can draw lines, how the data will move through those systems, and everything gonna be fine. Actually not. After adding more and more, a good approach is to start speaking to the people who actually use those components in some way. The reality looks slightly different. These are nodes. About 10% of the landscape. This is only marketing, some tracking, and so on. So I would say 10% of the picture we saw there. We can notice right away that actually not everything is so straightforward. The daily business is way more organic. They are not only those static data flows, but there are also a lot of people doing different tasks across the IT landscape. They're importing, exporting data from one to another, changing it, manipulating it, and so on and so forth. Besides of all the technical process and automated process which run in the background. Probably the first feeling that you're gonna have when you see that as a technical person is you're gonna be shocked, right? You have over 100 applications, people do stuff inside, how you can control or scale that. I would suggest a really simple checklist, which is generic enough to be applied to all the components, no matter if they're custom built. But on the other side, of course, things will be slightly different in your particular case. So why did you panic? Probably because you have the feeling that you lost control. When we're talking about control, I will highly suggest that you go through the following points. Department workflow. This describes the daily business of one department. The first factor, which is really important, it's slightly more on the organizational side, but it's also critical for the IT landscape, is the buzz factor. The buzz factor is the risk factor of not sharing information across team members. The chance that if your department workflow is complicated enough that people don't really understand how every single component works is quite big. So you should definitely flag that one. If you're doing your job right, probably department workflow will be already existing. This as a baseline for an efficient onboarding, but still, taking another look doesn't harm. Automation potential. Not everything can be automated. It's pity, but this is the way it is. However, you can always identify things that are, if somebody exports and imports data by changing one number, probably we can automate that process. So it's good once you're going through IT landscape to flag those easy wins. Consideration potential. The chance if you have 130 applications, for example, that they have duplicate functionality is quite high. One of the way to have more control and reduce components is to eliminate those which have a duplicate functionality. If you have like 3 or 4 different task management systems, you don't have to care about them all. Probably you can reduce them to 2 once you know what kind of functions are used there based on your department workflow. Data flow. This is something that is slightly underestimated. When you have a really complicated system through multiple components and so on and so forth, the idea of having them those in clusters that exchange data. If if we start building a system now from scratch for a business which is already established, probably we're going to take all those things in consideration. But if it's evolved in a natural way, the concept of single source of truth is slightly lost. Single source of truth means that a particular type of information from your data flow is controlled by one particular component. If you have multiple components being responsible for the same type of data, probably you're doing something wrong. Simple questions that you can ask yourself is, who decides that our products, for example, are out of stock? Is this our ERP system? Is this warehouse management? Is this our shop? Or this is a third-party system? Then this system is going to be the single source of truth where you always can check if something is in stock. This function of the single source of truth concept is, for example, internal example, as if an employee change her or his name because of a marriage, on how many places you have to change it. Do you have a system which distributes the data to all your IT landscape, or it's rather 3 different sources? Data flow, hot topic. Privacy data protection. Once you start mapping the data which goes through the different systems, they're going to be in easy streams, like the product stream, which is probably you decide where the master and the dynamic data is coming from. But one really critical stream is the customer data. You should always have a clear separation between privacy data and analytics data. This is like the evergreen question. If you have technical due diligence, like where is the separation? And you should definitely clarify that, because once again, if your IT landscape is a small jungle, the chance that the wrong data is flowing on the wrong place is kind of big. Besides of that, another topic is the communication security between those components. You should definitely check that for the processes which goes through APIs. This is kind of easy. You can check if where the place where the data is stored is encrypted, you have the right certificates and so on. However, it gets slightly tricky when it goes to manual processes. If you do a deep dive in the process inside of your marketing or accounting or sourcing department, you're gonna notice that some of the legacy systems, even if they're third-party, they have really outdated methods for transferring data. For example, upload on an FTP. And there is no way around it. So flagging that and making sure that this is done the right way is also a critical part of getting control over your IT landscape. Another favorite topic of me is access management. Normally, when you start a company with 10 people, you don't think about it. Everybody can create his account wherever, or her account, and at some point, this becomes a problem. You should check if the current component supports single sign-on, or like it manages the access rights locally. Why single sign-on important? Besides the consideration of accounts, this makes onboarding and offboardings really easy. You can also track who walked for the last time in your ERP system, on your shop system, and so on, which could be also kind of critical. Password management. When a company grows, you'll be shocked how many passwords they are, like following the pattern, Apple 123, password 1, secret 1, and so on and so forth. If you didn't do that, if you didn't think about password management, now is the right time. Otherwise, you're risking a huge security hole in a really junior way, just by brute force. A good practices for the systems which don't support single sign-on to have a centralized password manager. There are particular use cases. For example, the root passwords of a server, you cannot create it, you cannot connect it to Active Directory where everybody have access, but you may need the root password only once for recovery mode. And then it's gonna be kind of sad if the DevOps who has it in his local system is on vacation. Access retention. Also highly underestimated. What does it mean? A good example for that is the trainee phenomenon. A trainee is joining your company. He or her is going through multiple departments, accounting, controlling, helping, learning stuff. every time the trainee change a department, a new permissions are added. People are really proactive requesting access. But it happens like almost never that somebody says, oh, I see too many things, can you disable mine? So it's always a good practice to define rules when access is expiring. If the person doesn't have an access, he can request or she can request it again, rather than forgetting it that forever. Check. Ownership. This topic is also kind of big. Basically, you should define ownership for every component which is somehow related to your critical business. There should be a person which is responsible for defining the business needs, mainly answering the question, why do we need that? Or which problem is this component solving? And you should always have one from the technical side. Best case, the same person, but this is also depends on the component. The technical requirements shouldn't be ignored. You should have a simple approval process. Okay, this component has the APIs we needed. This component can be connected to our Active Directory or whatever you're using for central access, and so on and so forth. These are the things that you probably should consider regarding control. When it goes to scaling, what are the parameters there? I would say the most important thing is that you know how critical a component is. The first concept that you should take into consideration is the concept of a single point of failure. From the example from before, we talk about stock. Where is the stock stored? So the next question that you should ask yourself, what will happen if the system goes down? So the stock won't be updated, and the data streams goes, and will the marketing campaigns will be disabled, yes or no, or this gonna create the so-called cascade failure? It could be even more critical with user data. So you should split clearly which components are single point of failure. Or centralized account management will be a good example for single point of failure. Single point of failure, also known as a technical term, clusterfuck, which is also one of my favorite situations. This is my element. This is the situation as I like the most. No, of course not. But yes, sometimes it's fun. Know your limits of a particular component. A good way to find out the limits is to have an incident history. Always a good practice. This also shows how permanent are your limits. If you go through your incident reports and you see that you're facing new challenges over and over again, you're probably doing something right in most of the cases. This means that even if you find a particular limit, a bottleneck of your application, it was fixed, so you can move forward. However, everything has a particular limits that cannot be crossed. We are familiar with concepts like horizontal scaling, vertical scaling, or not scaling at all. They are components that you can scale only vertically. They are components that you don't have to scale at all. So know that before it's too late. The next thing that you should also take into consideration is the lifespan of this container. This is actually easy. No, it's not. If you know your business needs, so for example, a particular component have to serve 100,000 orders, and you know when this amount of orders will be reached, and you know your current limits, then you can probably roughly calculate where this component has to be replaced, which is always something really good to know before it's too late. This could be 1, 2, 3 years, which I doubt. This could be also slightly misleading because in my experience, there is nothing more permanent than a temporary solution, but still, keep that in mind. Once you defined which components are really critical, then you should define your service level agreement. No matter if we are talking about internal or external components or systems, the first thing that you should know is where do you report an issue? Is this your internal bugs list, or this is some email from third-party provider, or they have their own system? The last thing that you want to ask yourself is when you have a critical issues is who do I'm gonna call? And the answer is not Ghostbusters. Escalation plan. This is something which always evolves. When you have a critical issue, the so-called clusterfuck, the last thing that you want to do is starting to think who do you gonna inform, or how do you gonna format your email for that. So be prepared. Always have well-established escalation plan based on what is your experience with a particular service, third part, or your own. You can also consider creating on-call duty for your technical guys, if it's critical enough. So you know that the time to respond is, let's say, 30 minutes, no matter when the issue comes. Another approach is, of course, if this is a third-party service, you may upgrade your SLA agreement or switch to more premium support. Rather safe than sorry. Recovering strategies. Recovering strategies is also kind of huge topic. If you start thinking what can go wrong, probably everything. My suggestion is always to start preparing for the worst case scenario, or I don't know which could be the worst case, but the scenario which always gonna happen at some particular point is that this component is completely gone. If you're hosting it on your own, probably you have also responsibility over the data, so you should think about backups, recoveries, and so on and so forth. If this is a third-part component or service that you don't have control of, probably you should think about some fallback, like how we can short-circuit the system so it survives till the third-party provider recover the service. Be prepared. Once you check that, my favorite topic, monitoring. Of course, once you went through your systems and you know which systems are single source of truth for particular critical informations, you know which systems, once they die, they're gonna interrupt a critical data flow or process. You should split your metrics in 3 groups. The first one is health check. This is the question, the most simple question, does this component work? It's mostly a Boolean. It either works or not. This could be a simple ping, this could be hitting a particular route, and so on. Having a detailed monitoring helps you distinguish problems from symptoms, which is really important to see, okay, we have an issue. Is this really the component which does something wrong? Or maybe somewhere in the pipeline, another component went offline. Once you cover that and you know that the system is working, the next thing are the performance metrics. Knowing that something's alive doesn't mean that it functions. It's always good to define not more than 5 or 3 metrics. I know dashboards looks really awesome. Eye candy, a lot of things on them. However, if you add more data, probably it's just going to be distracting. Focus on 3 or 5 KPIs, which are really crucial for the system. If it's a backup management system, probably disk size. If it's an ERP system, probably the amount of database queries per second. This will also help you find the limits. And if you reach that level and you already covered all the technical metrics and all the health check metrics, the best thing that you can do is see if you can extract some kind of business KPIs from this component. An example for business KPI could be successful order transaction per second, or canceled orders, and so on and so forth. If you do that really good, probably you can also see the connection between all those metrics, and this is definitely going to help you know what exactly is happening in your landscape once you really need it. So I know this is a lot of information. I try to keep it generic as possible. The idea here is that you take all those bullet points that I just introduced. First, try to cluster your landscape if you already didn't. Then go through every single component and fill the bullet points. Do I have an escalation plan? How critical is this component? Is it somehow included in the monitoring system? What would be the impact? What is the technical state out of that? This is how far I can help you. What is the particular weight of every factor that we just discussed? You should decide on your own. Is your business focused on the shop or on content and so on and so forth? Which systems are making most of the troubles, and where do you want to focus? Is just up to you. Just keep one thing in mind. I really like quoting this Conway law, is that organizations which design systems are constrained to produce designs which are copies of the communication structure of those organizations. Something really smart, I guess, that at 1968 they already had those issues. If your company is constantly evolving, all the systems should evolve as well. I witnessed how one person became a whole department. How from having 100 orders a day, they scaled till 30, 50,000 orders. Small things that you ignore may evolve to bigger issues. Of course, everything evolves. With your success, also your problems. It's sad, but this is the way it is. And you should be prepared that no matter what the state now is of your IT landscape, once you go through all the components, probably new processes, new departments, new communication channels will be introduced. So this is slightly never-ending story. And you're probably never going to find a solution which is going to fit all of your problems. So you have to somehow deal with clusters and components. Do you have any questions?
What was the most recent limit you did reach?
Okay, I won't mention the company name. 2 days before closing the financial year, we noticed that some of the orders are not processed. Like, we were sending invoices to people, everything was fine, but the invoices were not improved from the payment method. There were no errors in the logs, everything was fine, like everything was working. Then at some point we noticed that we reached the limit of the API, which was slowly building a backlog. Like, we were able to process a particular amount, the worker we had, the particular amount of orders for every 24 hours. However, for the recent 5 days, we were overperforming. So we built a backlog from 1 day, basically, which is like the cryptocurrency concept. You have the money, and probably it's a funny situation, and you could be really happy that this happened. But on the other side, the financial year was closing in 2 days, which means that this small limit of the worker processing the orders would completely mess up our completely yearly cash flow. This is the latest.
Thanks for sharing.
Thanks for sharing, Mr. Angel. Could you tell the story about the bus factor? Why is it called bus factor?
Okay, why is it called bus factor? This is the factor, this is the calculation, how many people from a particular department has to be hit by bus to the particular process or department cannot function anymore. basically, this is the phenomena where you have a sport car, but only one person from 30 has the key. So you cannot start it. This is the buzz factor, which is also extremely common, especially if you support agility, where people can try new stuff and so on. So flexibility is always sacrificing some of the control. Also, pretty common situation, somebody is sick and you cannot do A, B, or C. Anybody else? Okay, then thank you for your attention.